Rightio. Well, good to meet you guys again, Matt, Lionel, and those that are listening in or watching for the first time. This is the Accelerating AI Conference podcast. We launched a couple just last week post our event, which was super cool. And today we're talking about a couple of topics. The first one is about the really interesting area of a model being wiped down and taken off Fable Five Anthropic's product. So I'll open up. Matt, Lionel, what do you think of the news and kind of describe to us what happened?
For those that maybe aren't across the news, the controversy around Fable 5, it's probably worth pointing out that a few weeks back, Anthropic effectively released a statement saying that they had a model that was so powerful, it was too dangerous to be released. And half the internet would get taken down because of vulnerabilities that it's able to find. And in truth, there were large organizations did find day one vulnerabilities with this model, which was called Mythos. So the general consensus was that it wasn't probably going to be released anytime soon. And then there was chatter on the day of our conference last week, so it's a week on from the conference now. There was chatter online about a potential new model being dropped by Anthropic. It turns out that after saying they weren't going to release it, they decided to release it, albeit with some pretty hefty guardrails around the thing to stop it from doing anything naughty. And from what then occurred 48 hours later, or less than 48 hours later, was a directive from the US government to effectively force Anthropic to pull the model globally. So those that did get the luxury, and as you guys know, I was tinkering around with it on the night of our conference to see what it could do. That's felt like almost being teased a little bit, like given something that you can play with and then it being taken away from you. So I think from a human standpoint and from a tech development standpoint, it's really frustrating. But I think broader than that, it's quite a big deal, like the politics getting involved at this stage of AI development. And the irony is that most of the big players have been saying for a long time that it should be more regulated. And the moment the government do intervene, it's seen as a negative. So yeah, it's quite an interesting situation to be in, right? Because we know there's better models that exist, right? And we could have access to them, but we can't. I don't know, Lionel, how you feel about that. It's an interesting development, I guess.
Yeah, lots to unpack with the whole situation, and I think that opens up the barn doors for lots of wider questions. And so the question is, I think the first and foremost is AI safety. And the question is, can AI be made safe in general, just in general? We've seen Anthropic's attempt at putting guardrails in. It supposedly was exposed by one of their partners, Amazon, where they managed to circumvent and get around the guardrail. So in other words, get Fable or Mythos to divulge information about cybersecurity risks, and therefore it was reported. So the question is, are guardrails even effective in the first place, right? The other thing is we're starting to see that AI is becoming political, right? AI threatens. Mythos was finding CVEs, which is vulnerabilities in coding and coding stacks that were sat hidden for 20 plus years, right? So think about the ramifications, implications here. It has the ability to bring down national infrastructure, utilities, power, internet, if used in the wrong way. Anthropic's just proven guardrails don't really work. So we've got a bit of a problem, right? With potentially, humanity now has this fantastic bit of kit that has the ability to really, really bring so much of good in the world. But equally, in the same measure, it has the ability to destroy. So how do we deal with it? So many questions rather than answers, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that large tech giants and large enterprise can protect themselves from such risks, but smaller organizations, smaller businesses, and actually national infrastructure like the NHS, the police service, police force, there is still a lot of outdated infrastructure within those organizations. And whether that's, I don't want to get into politics, but lack of funding or lack of being able to update systems or get themselves to a position where they are able to harden their security. I think with the best will in the world, you could release this models to strictly those entities, and it may take years before you're actually in a position where all of those vulnerabilities have been solved. I mean, you work in the world of IT, Lionel. There's always going to be vulnerabilities. Doesn't really matter how robust you are. But it is quite a terrifying thought. We as an agency host on the order of 100 websites in total and platforms and systems. We use a myriad of software, SaaS products. We live online, right? We run our business online. Everything is through the internet. And the thought that every single one of those platforms, touch points, things we've built all have huge potential security gaps is terrifying. And of course, the first thing I did when I got my hands on Fable was to try that out, see if I can find any vulnerabilities in my code. And do you know what? It popped up with a big error message, basically saying we've blocked what you're trying to do. And I was both disappointed and extremely happy at the same time.
In equal measure. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was disappointed because I really wanted to find those things and fix them. Mythos Fable would have allowed me to do it. But equally, it means that anybody that gets access to any of our code can't do it either. So there's a trade-off to be had, right? You want the model for yourself so you can use it to fix your stuff, but you don't want it in the hands of bad actors that could use it against you, right?
I think it's really interesting though, Matt. Lionel. I mean, there were several companies on Project Glasswing, right? This is the project that brought together the government and several private companies, really large tech companies and non-tech, and they try to like really address how to work with Mythos and what it's capable of, and get maybe the backing and the PR statement at the same time. But then, like, I was thinking, when Fable was dropped, and I wrote about this as well, like dependency on models, like a single provider, becomes a huge risk for businesses organizations that are like expecting to get more out of that one single provider, right? So these AI labs, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or fill in the blank, these guys are, we create a dependency issue. And I think companies are going to start thinking about model diversification. That's the way I kind of coined it, which is the ability to figure out how, if in the event we have another Fable situation where we're highly dependent on a model that's working very, very well, that how does a company really think about the fallback, right? In the instance where the model becomes unavailable, it gets dinged. So that's one thing. And I think another as well is the government in the US said US only, actually, right? So they said anybody outside the US cannot have access to it. And so I think there's an increasingly important conversation that nations, countries outside of the US are thinking about, well, how do we think about models, and how do we think about the models that we're deploying, and this idea of sovereign AI, which is this new important topic where, AI labs are coming and spun out of the country itself. Like, that's a huge, really important thing that I think the public sector, a lot of politicians and, regulation will start thinking about, is actually we need to protect ourselves, because let's face it, if we depend too much on external vendors, global companies that may be not in the UK, and we pose a risk to our organization if we are highly dependent on these models to do the work we want.
Yeah, I think
there's.
Sorry,
I'd just like to address a couple of things there and unpack that. Number one, most people like the idea of using Fable 5 or Opus 4.8. The reality of it is that most tasks people do can be achieved equally well in an equal measure by a free LLM provider. If you look at OpenRoute and you look at how LLMs are being used, at the moment, over 50% of those are just being used with open source LLMs.
And actually, just to add on that, there are local models that you can install, so you have no reliance on external. And some of those local models are getting as good. They are behind the frontier models, yes, but behind by maybe 6 months, right? Maybe slightly longer, depends on the model of your choosing. But local models are becoming more and more popular, and I think within enterprise, within businesses, a lot of the concerns around data leaving the organization, and you've now touched on reliability and redundancy. A lot of those could be addressed within many organizations by having a local model and only really using frontier models for specific use cases where it requires it, right? So I think maybe that's how businesses can plan initially, is maybe explore that, or IT teams can plan, but it isn't going to solve all of these problems.
I don't think it's a solution for a very, very long time, because if you look at the direction in which all the models are going, by every model developer, recursive self-learning is a huge feature. So it's not going, in lots of ways, it's really not going to matter, because once a model gets to recursive self-learning, it becomes completely hands-off, right? It doesn't need us anymore. It does its own thing. And the rate at which, in effect, AI evolves is going to be purely down to hardware. this becomes purely not a software race. At the moment, it's a bit of a software race, right? And everybody's trying to get enough inference chips to stay ahead in the software race. I think it's increasingly going to become a hardware race, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't think in a very short period of time it's going to matter, because once the models become recursively self-learning, it gets very, very far beyond what we would actually need it for. It starts to transcend sort of a different plane.
I think just there was another point that Andy made that I just want to come back to as well. I think we're moving into effectively a world where we've got the traditional utilities, right? We've got we've got gas, water, electric, right? And I would argue within the UK, internet has become the fourth major
Yes.
utility, right?
Yeah.
And I think AI is becoming the fifth, right? Our ability as a country to harness the technology, be leaders in the development of the technology. And if you look at the UK, we're not currently. We're not at all. And now you look at the States, and effectively, I mean, at the point of recording, Fable 5 is currently still unavailable. Now, that might change in the next 24, 48, 72 hours. Who really knows? What I do know is that, just under a week from now, Anthropic is said to be meeting with the White House to, I guess, see how they can pay the way forward to get Fable 5 back in the hands of people. But it will be interesting to see if that restriction around US citizens only being able to access the model plays out, because then you start getting into, okay, actually, the US has a competitive advantage because they have access to the most recent model, and where does that leave us in the world, right? Is it the next oil race, right, where the ones that have the best models are the ones, the nations that thrive the most, and does that tip the balances of economies around the world? So I think it's quite serious stuff when you get into that, and how that could play out for the UK economy, given we are relatively far behind on the global stage in developing our own models.
I think in the future, I mean, at the moment, the pace is determined by one chip fab, TSMC. Let's face it. Other fabs are coming online. The Americans are, America's pushing a lot for that fab. You've got Elon Musk touting a huge operation in Texas to build his own chips. Soon, chip building isn't a constraint. Our next big constraint is power. So we have a power constraint. And I think Elon Musk has already seen the writings on the wall. So therefore, deploying data centers in space where
Yeah.
Electricity is extremely cheap and cooling is extremely cheap, because you vacuum, you're cooling in the vacuum of space. He's got that figured out, right? Because the next grab is not going to be the chip fab. That's being solved now. The next grab is the power grab, right? And how we're going to deal with it. And let's face it, we're only using, a fraction of what comes from the sun on the Kardashev scale. So we're just tickling that. So there's lots of really, really interesting, and I suppose that the much bigger question is, to reiterate what you're talking about, Matthew, is what do we do as a country? Where do we set our sights? And I don't think anyone is thinking about what that future looks like just yet, sadly.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we're sorry.
it's a really difficult question to address. I think the UK, we're great. We have some fantastic universities and academics. We do have amazing pipeline of talent that comes out of this country, and we attract a lot of good talent. But I think where there needs to be real thinking about is through policy and how we really invest in the future. And that we're thinking about AI growth zones. I think that's a great start as we think about actual hardware being invested across different areas of the country. That's a good step forward. And we have the Sovereign AI Fund, which has been set up a few months ago, investing in British-based businesses that are at the cutting edge, right? And so there is some movement there. I think London Tech Week last week London Tech Week, the government announced some really big visa-based opportunities for international talent to come in. So I think there is some change. It's gradual. I don't think it's like it needs to be faster, and of course we want it to be as competitive as perhaps the US and China are where they are today. But we have amazing talent here. We have some really good
We do, but
skills.
unfortunately, we don't have the economic environment to power that. And if you compare the US and China, they have engines that have the ability to fund these things. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, Europe just plays too much of a safe bet. Europe makes an investment, or any country, the investment philosophy is make an investment and expect an immediate ROI. The Chinese and the US don't invest in that way. It's a different investment culture. And none of this is going to happen without money, without serious money and serious capital to fund it. Therefore, people with great ideas go to the US, right? They go where they can get funded
Mm.
because there's an availability of cash.
It would be wrong not to mention the insane what was it, 1.2 trillion, 1.5 trillion dollar valuation of SpaceX going to.
No, it was posited at 1.8. It reached
Right.
2.1. Right?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where's all the money come from? If you've looked at crypto markets recently, they've taken a hit because all the people are divested out of crypto. Right? Put it in the new AI frontier. Now, bear that in mind, right? We've got two other IPOs hot on its heels, right? We've got Anthropic IPO coming up. We've got OpenAI IPO coming up. Where's the money going to come from, right? Where is the money coming from for these IPOs? And do you want to be second in the IPO race for the year? Do you want to be third in the IPO race for the year,
Yeah.
right?
Well, they need to get their cash back, right? After all that investment that some of these on these data centers, right? Like OpenAI have been ahead of the curve. I was just reading up on this whole, like, Anthropic is a little bit behind. Let's face it, on their data center strategy, and OpenAI have been, lucky or positioned themselves future thinking.
Well, Dario has done pretty well with Elon Musk for getting a lot of compute off his supercluster.
Yeah.
That was reserved for Grok AI, but Dario's managed to convince Elon that he needs access to that cluster, and that's powering the current chips. I mean, forward buying at the moment for capacity on Elon's high data center, solar data center operation is starting to happen already, right?
I guess just to add on that, for viewers, Lionel, the significance, I guess, of SpaceX, Grok, and it being an AI company, but it's a space company. Just what's the significance of that?
The significance is one man's vision has it pretty much sewn up. Okay. Elon Musk started with Tesla, as you know. Tesla very, very quickly became about electric vehicles and electrification, and very, very quickly about full self-driving. They started an AI business off the back of that, trying to build Grok as a Grok model. At the same time, he's pioneering the space industry and winning space contracts. Falcon 1 is now become absolute. It takes 95% of all the mass into space. Okay. And if you look at his ambitions now to take more mass into space, that's absolutely phenomenal. And he's a master at manufacturing. And nobody realizes he's the absolute undisputed master at manufacturing. But when you start stitching up and understanding where the future constraints are coming from accessibility to power, okay? Real estate, we're talking about the NIMBY culture. The NIMBY culture is not in my backyard. Nobody wants data centers in their backyard, okay? We've got a problem at the moment where there is this big discussion about water consumption and cooling. Okay. We also have this issue about how we're going to generate electricity. The world has not created energy sources fast enough. Yes, we're getting it from renewables, but the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. We're not going to invest in coal, and frankly, we just haven't invested fast enough in nuclear globally. Right. So all of these things point to a crunch point where Elon Musk is starting to solve these problems with building an AI chip fab, shifting mass into orbit, gaining from the fact that a solar array is 5 times more productive in space than it is on Earth. Right.
Yeah.
And you don't have a cooling constraint because in the darkness, it's extremely cold. Okay, so just stitching that up together is building a future pipeline of cash and revenue that if you didn't invest, you'd probably be a fool if you saw it was all where it's all going.
Because there isn't, other than what Elon's doing, there isn't a single solution provider for all of that end to end, is there? And he has very much. I mean, you've got to add on that robotics as well, right?
Of course,
And that ties in with manufacturing and everything else.
Starlink,
So being able to robots potentially build into space and.
Interestingly enough, Starlink is the cash cow in all of this. So Starlink was built in order to be the revenue generation tool to make everything else happen, right? Which is amazing because if you think satellite phones are now going to become ubiquitous, they'll probably replace your 5G, 6G phones. And then the phone market is all sewn up by a satellite provider, and nobody else is keeping pace fast enough. Right. And then that's just the reality of it. Lots of interesting times ahead.
I want to move on to the second topic. Matt, you had a discussion with a colleague internally. Let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah. So the statement was effectively AI, it's all a big bubble and it's going to burst one day, a bit like the dot-com bubble, and it burst and then rebounded over over a period. Now, my immediate response was to bite my tongue on that one because I have a very, very different standpoint. I think it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about the financial bubble bursting, as in, or AI just suddenly not being around anymore, which is it's just insane. It's not going to happen. It's a technology that we've only barely harnessed, right? And I think there's significantly more to go. The financial side, I do understand because what we're seeing, and it came up at the conference actually, that the cost of using these frontier models is widely debated and frankly complained about online because, and there's plenty of memes that have spawned up as a result. The boss saying use AI, and then the bill coming in at the end of the month and it being more expensive than the cost of the humans it replaced, right? So I think there is a real problem with the cost of AI. And at the moment, a lot of people have been shielded by that, by the subscriptions that they've been able to sign up to. I take the max subscription with Claude, 200 quid a month. And I certainly, with all of the things I've been doing and projects I've been spinning up and building over the last few weeks, I've not hit any limits, right? And I think those that are hitting limits are probably on the lower plans, and therefore they're not, their usage is going to get capped because they're only paying 20 quid a month, right? But when you actually look at that and you look at that, the cost of those subscriptions and the token usage within those subscriptions versus paying for an API, vastly different expenditure, right? For a 200 quid a month, the usage I'm getting on a 200 quid a month subscription is probably more like 1,200, 1,300, 1,400 quid a month of tokens, right? If it was down the API route. So what I'm basically saying is the cost of the technology is actually being artificially kept low at the moment. I think that's the general view. Is that the cost of the technology is increasing and is getting more expensive. I think Fable 5 was effectively twice as expensive as Opus 4.8. Right. And the next model may well be twice as expensive as Fable 5 is. Right. And we are talking about the bleeding edge of models. And what is missed in that debate is the fact that the prior models are actually coming down in price. So I think that's part of it. But, with the IPOs, the conversation we've just had, the one that's just been and gone with SpaceX, but also the two pending ones. Do we think that this is going to burst? That the amount of money that's gone into this technology is just way beyond anything that could ever provide a return. What do you think, guys?
It's a really hard question to answer, really. And from my perspective,
We don't give financial advice either. just to be clear for anyone watching,
we don't.
No, we don't.
I'm joking. Is the bubble going to burst? I think that there's a lot of borrowing that's happening right now by a lot of these labs, right? So but then there's also, there's a lot of mutual benefit between, like, let's say Microsoft and OpenAI as one of the earlier sort of investors, right? Because now GPT was put into Copilot's product, and they brought all this value to their enterprise users. So I think there's a bit of that. I think ultimately, when we're thinking about the burst, it's difficult to say. I think the market's going to change. I think it all comes down to right now the cost of tokens. Yeah, as it's gradually going lower and lower over time. It's not about token cost. I think it's all about the cost of hardware and to run hardware, and it kind of ties into all of that stuff that we were just talking about, really around how much does it cost to put that capex towards hardware. How do we keep it cool, and how do we keep it powered? Right. And if we have a sustainable way of doing that, then we are really solving the crunch that we could be leading towards if Elon doesn't solve this problem for us. No, I'm joking. If we have a solution there, I think it all comes down to this, boils down to kind of very, very similar challenge. I think we're getting a lot of value out of it today for an average consumer, right? £15 a month versus like an enterprise using the tokens at scale. There's a huge like amount of value you get out of these models. I think also, and you touched on it, Lionel, model router, that the router concept, which is, hey, don't use Ferraris for a milk run. Don't use an expensive model to do cheap, easy tactical things. Or use a free model, like an open source one, to do tactical, cheap things, right? And don't use the ones that are run in the cloud that buy like an AI lab.
So on that one, when you're, I guess, bringing it back to business a little bit, actually, when you're mapping a process in the business that you want to automate aspects of with AI, would you map individual processes to the right model for the right job? Is that what you're effectively saying?
Yeah. And that is decided on, like, do we want it right now? Do we need it immediate as well? Because, models are faster than others. So latency, quality, right? How many parameters is this model made up of? Like, the bigger the model, in theory, the better, reasoning, like how much thinking does it need to have? And so there are various, there are different factors at play in that.
And I think, just to add on that, your average potential watcher on this program is probably, using tools. We know from the AI conference that generally the most common one is ChatGPT, right? They're opening up ChatGPT. They're doing something on ChatGPT. They're probably not playing around with the settings on the bottom right-hand corner, because why would they, right? It's a subscription. They don't unless they're hitting some sort of usage limits, which the average user is not doing. They are getting output probably from the most frontier model, because that's the ones that they generally default to. Although it is interesting that Claude will select a model for you, and it will actually override a
Adaptive.
model and use a different model if it needs to. And I think the solution is there in actually the providers themselves are recognizing that they can route the query or the job through any one of their models that the model assesses it can do. Does that make sense? So I think that'll be quite interesting to see if that becomes a universal thing, where the expectation is on the model provider to select the relevant model that user needs, rather than putting it all on the user to say, this job requires Mythos, this job requires Sonnet, right? And I think for what it's worth for consumers, that's the right approach, because I don't think your average consumer is ever going to fully understand and be in the right position to make that decision around which model they should be using. Enterprise, different story, right? We're technical people. We work with businesses, and they will, businesses with IT teams, businesses with technical people can work this stuff out, but the average consumer can't. So if consumers become massive adopters of AI technology, which is definitely the trend we're seeing, consumers using it more and more and more in their daily lives, if they start hitting usage limits, right, because they are using it all day, every day, then I think that's something that's going to have to be tackled. I don't think it's going to take much to tackle it, but yeah, I just wanted to add that on there, because OpenRouter, as an example, is a very technical thing to implement. I actually think that there should be emphasis on the models themselves to help the user pick the right model, or do it for them, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting conversation about, is this all going to burst? Personally, I think it's a matter of optics, and I think the optics are wrong. So what do I mean by that? Intelligence is becoming ubiquitous and it's becoming cheaper. We know that. The cost of this intelligence is being driven down massively every single week, every single month, every single year, number one. So intelligence as a utility, yes, that's coming. And it's coming because of lots of really interesting things, because when you build the robots will build more robots that will build the chips, that will build the fabs, that will do the thing. And that's in the sort of mid-future, right? But what's happening right now, and you're right about model choice. I mean, my pipeline of model of agents running in Claude will choose whether the main thinking parameters was Opus, and then my planning and architecture bills was Opus, and my documentation writer was Sonnet. Once you start making those optimizations, you'll be surprised. I mean, my token usage dropped threefold. Right, I went from spending 70 million tokens a month down to 25, whatever the case might be. So it's very, very much doable. But why do I say it's a matter of optics? It's a matter of optics because if you create an agent that 5x's a specific task output, right? I'll give you an example. You're a bookkeeper. You can process 100 documents a day. Now you have an agent that can reliably process 500 documents a day. Why are we complaining about the cost? Because the cost isn't 5x, right? The cost is maybe 1 point. Do the math. I think the optics is wrong, and I think we've got to change the way we think. If we want to take advantage of this new frontier, we want to take advantage of the 5x, 10x, 50x, 100x gain, then we should be prepared not to quibble about the incremental cost that comes with it. And it's for us to understand the gain and see the reality and the value in the gain. So number one, I think it's very, very much an optics thing. And it's because of that and because of its usefulness. Whenever something is genuinely and truly useful, it never goes away. Okay? Products and services that are not genuinely useful expend and expire and you never see them again. Right? But AI is not going to go away because it is truly, genuinely useful on a global scale, humanitarian scale. Fix really difficult maths problems, science problems, bio problems is a reality. So the ability, to cure all disease in the next 10 years is now become a reality for society. And that's not just me saying it. This is Demis, the DeepMind co-founder, saying that it is within our reach to cure all disease in the next 10 years, right? Can you put a price on that? Can you put a price on the number of tokens to eradicate cancer, to eradicate heart disease, to eradicate Alzheimer's disease? Really, come on. I think the optics are completely wrong. And I think that's what needs to change, not whether the bubble's going to burst.
Do you think it's that habit of thinking the old way, right? So we're thinking too much the old way when we're making statements like that, because we all acknowledge and we've spoken that the world of work and indeed our lives as society is going to have to change, right? So we're looking at the bubble's going to burst question from the lens of everything carrying on as it is right now. And
Yes.
and I was about to challenge you actually then, Lionel, because you're saying about the bookkeeper that goes from doing 100 documents to 500 documents a day. The question mark there was, has the value of what she does decreased in the eyes of, I guess, everyone else? So let's say she was doing 100 documents a day, and I'm going to use an easy number of £1 a document, right? So £100 a day is what she currently gets paid for doing those documents. When she can suddenly do 500 documents, is she now worth £500 a day, or is she still worth £100 a day because the value of what she does has been eroded? And just to add on that, I've always said, I wish, and I'm sure you guys are the same. If I was the only one in the world that had AI, it would be absolutely transformative for my business and me, and would allow me to compete at a level that nobody else could ever compete at. But we all have these tools, right? We all have the same stack, yeah? So that bookkeeper that's doing 500 documents a day, well, somebody down the road is doing 600 documents a day using the exact same tool stack. Is she more valuable?
Well, here's the thing. You're as valuable as market forces will allow. So if you're the first one churning 500 documents and charging £1 because you can, because market forces dictate you can still charge £1, then yes. But this is all about market forces. This is about economies, right? And as soon as that drops to 75 pence a document, to 50 pence, it will be whatever the new norm of what the market forces will tolerate. Right. And that's all it is just economies of scale and what market forces will tolerate. I'll also go further on saying that as businesses, the optics are still wrong, because we look at the job somebody does and we think, can we supplement what they do with AI, right? So as long as you look and you tackle the problem of, here's the person, how can we supplement them with AI? You might maybe 2x, 3x their output, maybe 4x their output. But if you want the job to have a 20x, 50x, 100x output, you've got to rethink the job and the person's role. The job stops being something that's agentic assisted. You rethink the model, you make an agentic job. Okay, so you rebuild the process from ground up, you make an agentic job, and then you put the human in the loop for the exceptions. And then suddenly that availability of 5xing, 10xing, 20xing what you do becomes a reality, because you've now created that process from the ground up as an agentic process with human in the loop, rather than a human process supplemented with AI. That's the corker. That's the game changer.
And I think from there, like as we think about software, previously and work and labor, there was this notion of time value based pricing, and then your time based pricing. And I think agentic AI now is moving to like action based or completion based model, right? Pricing model. So for example, in the bookkeeping one, right, our agent completed one bookkeeping task. So now, when we think about how much we pay, it's not actually based on the amount of time we're charging. Like, for example, like, is it McKinsey or these other major consultancies? They're being forced to reduce their hourly rate because now they're powered or supercharged with agents to do their work. But I think that pricing model and that value with human in the loop is going to be shifting to, like, did the AI do its job, right? Then we pay the AI. And then where we are sort of humans in the loop, or we are more critical thinkers around that and the architects of that, we attribute our time and work towards and then therefore bill according to that.
Yeah. So you'll have two sets of scales. And if you're charging based on transactions, to process the AI processed document is 15 pence per transaction. Human in the loop transaction is £1.50. Okay. And that's where we're starting to see the differentiators coming in terms of how would you quantify AI's role in a job, right? You still have to absorb the token costs. You still have to deal with that. You still have to deal
Yep.
with the engineering costs and everything that's gone into producing the tool. But relatively speaking, it's far cheaper than the human element of the HITL, human in the loop part of it, right? So, and I think moving forward, we'll start to see all of these really, really interesting charging mechanisms coming out the back of what we're doing. And it just goes back into, this becomes about the economy again, right? Becomes about what the economy will tolerate and what the market forces will dictate. It's never going to be zero, okay? It'll be close to it, but it's never going to be zero, right? Depending on how we progress.
It's really disrupting the traditional model of how people make decisions, purchasing decisions. Traditionally it would be a triangle almost of time, cost, and quality, right? Those are typically the way people make buying decisions. And you can pick two, but you can't have all three, right? So you can have something that's really quick and high quality, but it's going to cost quite a bit. You can have something that's cheap, but it's probably not going to be the best quality. Sorry, you can have it cheap and quick, but it's probably not going to be the best quality. And that's generally how this works. And what's really interesting about AI is it kind of touches on all three of those things at the same time, right? It's able to do things relatively cheaply. I mean, yes, we've just had that whole debate about cost, but the trend is downwards over time. So it's going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper to do stuff. It's lightning fast at doing stuff, and it's making fewer and fewer and fewer mistakes. So all three of those elements of how people make decision is being influenced by this. So I think if you're buying something, or particularly buying a service at this particular moment in time from a service-based business, you're going to be coming at this from one of those angles, and you'll see that AI is making it easier, quicker, cheaper for that company to deliver that service. So your expectation of the value of that company comes down. It really is though about what one of those things matters most to you.
I think it's more fundamental, and I think we all need to wake up to it in some way, shape, or form. Capitalism in its form right now has been based on labor arbitrage, right? Bringing humans and using humans to achieve something because humans possessed the intelligence. We're now seeing the decoupling in the labor market. Why? Because we are no longer at the pinnacle or the top of that. We're starting to become decoupled from the top of the intelligence equation, okay? So all of those three things you talked about was driven by human intelligence. We don't need that to a large degree anymore, okay? Now it's the cost of the token that provides the intelligence. So you can have all three pieces of the cake and you can eat it, right? And that's where it's going.
We've got to wrap up now because we can keep going on. I know there's so much in there, but those that are listening, thank you for being on this, listening to this podcast. If you want to learn more about accelerating AI, go to acceleratingai.co.uk. We have an amazing conference lined up in October with MK Tech Week. Please check it out. And if not, until then, see you at the next one.
See you at the next one.
Bye.